Excellent work on these numbers. Please keep it up.
Thank you, sir. We will.
And our community program? Doing very well, sir. We have great feedback.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Look at this page here.
The evidence is irrefutable.
No, this can't be.
You have subjected her to this humiliation. Look at this. Please, believe me.
Please me. It's over.
I know who did it. And you're certain?
The people who ignore you when you're holding a mop are often the same people who beg for your attention when they learn your name. On a cool Friday evening in downtown Chicago, the Grand Meridian Hotel glowed like a palace of glass and gold. Luxury cars lined the entrance, camera flashes lit up the sidewalk, and hundreds of guests in designer suits and elegant gowns streamed through the revolving doors for one of the most exclusive corporate galas of the year. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, and a live jazz band filled the air with soft music. Every guest seemed important. Every conversation sounded expensive. And yet, almost nobody noticed Naomi Carter. Dressed in a simple dark housekeeping uniform, she moved quietly through the ballroom with a cleaning cart, making sure every corner looked perfect before the evening reached its peak. She wiped fingerprints from glass panels, collected empty water bottles left behind by staff, and straightened chairs that had shifted out of place during setup. To the guests, she was invisible. Naomi preferred it that way. She kept her eyes calm and her posture confident, even when people walked past her as if she didn't exist. A server accidentally bumped into a guest near the entrance, causing a few drops of sparkling water to splash onto the floor. Before the server could react, the guest pointed toward Naomi without even looking at her face. "Someone get the cleaner," he said. Naomi walked over, smiled politely, and cleaned the spill. The guest immediately turned back to his conversation as if she had never been there. Across the ballroom, event host Victoria Hale stood near the stage greeting executives and investors. Everything about her projected authority. She noticed Naomi crossing the room and frowned slightly. "Why is housekeeping still visible?" she quietly asked one of the managers. "The gala has already started." The manager shrugged nervously. "She's just finishing a few tasks." Victoria shook her head. "Guests come here to see success, not cleaning equipment." Naomi heard the comment as she passed nearby. She didn't react. Instead, she continued working. A few minutes later, a group of wealthy guests gathered around a cocktail table near the center of the ballroom. One man glanced toward Naomi and laughed softly. "Imagine spending your Friday night cleaning up after people who make more money in an hour than you do all year." Several people chuckled. Naomi continued replacing a trash liner without saying a word. Her silence seemed to encourage them. Another guest smirked and said, "At least she has a front row seat to success." More laughter followed. Naomi simply pushed her cart forward and kept moving. What nobody realized was that she wasn't studying the decorations, the menu, or the celebrity guests. She was studying the people. Every conversation, every attitude, every small decision. She noticed who thanked servers and who ignored them. She noticed who treated employees with respect and who treated them like furniture. As the evening grew louder and the ballroom filled to capacity, Naomi stopped briefly near a large window overlooking the city skyline. The lights of Chicago stretched for miles into the darkness. Behind her, the gala sparkled with wealth and prestige. Ahead of her, reflected faintly in the glass, were dozens of smiling faces who believed they understood exactly who she was. They were wrong. And before the night was over, every one of them was about to learn just how wrong they had been. The gala continued gathering momentum as more executives, investors, and public figures arrived. Conversations became louder, laughter echoed across the ballroom, and servers moved carefully through the crowd carrying trays of sparkling drinks and appetizers. Naomi Carter continued her work without drawing attention to herself. She emptied overflowing trash bins near the side corridors, adjusted decorative arrangements that guests had accidentally disturbed, and quietly ensured everything remained flawless. The more she observed, the more she noticed a pattern. Some people treated every employee with kindness, offering simple thank yous and warm smiles. Others barely acknowledged that staff members were human beings. Near the center of the ballroom, Victoria Hale stood on stage welcoming attendees to the annual Meridian Leadership Gala. Her polished voice carried confidently through the room as she praised innovation, integrity, and corporate values. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Naomi listened while replacing supplies at a nearby service station. She found it interesting how often people spoke about respect while failing to practice it. As Victoria concluded her remarks, a round of applause filled the ballroom. Guests returned to their conversations while a string quartet began performing near the stage. Naomi pushed her cleaning cart toward a quieter section near the exhibition displays where several sponsors had arranged promotional showcases. As she approached one of the tables, she noticed a diamond necklace displayed inside a glass presentation case. According to the information card beside it, the piece had been donated by a luxury jewelry company for a charity auction later that evening. Several guests admired it while discussing its value. Naomi glanced at it briefly before continuing her work. Moments later, she noticed a young server looking nervous after dropping a stack of cocktail napkins. Without hesitation, Naomi helped gather them from the floor. The server smiled gratefully. "Thank you," he said. "It has been one of those nights." Naomi smiled back. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes." The interaction lasted only a few seconds, but it was one of the few genuine moments she had experienced all evening. Across the room, Victoria observed Naomi once again. For reasons she could not explain, the sight of the cleaner moving comfortably through the event seemed to irritate her. She called over a floor manager and pointed discreetly toward Naomi. "Why is she still everywhere?" Victoria asked. "Guests keep seeing her." The manager looked confused. "She is doing her job." Victoria folded her arms. "Then tell her to stay out of sight." The manager reluctantly walked away. A few minutes later, he approached Naomi and awkwardly repeated the instruction. Naomi listened politely and nodded. "Of course," she said. "I will stay near the service areas." She showed no frustration, which somehow made the situation even more uncomfortable for the manager. As Naomi turned to leave, a sudden murmur spread through the nearby crowd. People began gathering around the jewelry display. Several voices overlapped. Someone sounded alarmed. Others seemed confused. Naomi stopped and looked toward the commotion. The glass case that had displayed the diamond necklace only minutes earlier now stood empty. Within seconds, whispers spread across the ballroom. Guests exchanged nervous glances. Staff members hurried toward the scene. And for the first time that evening, dozens of eyes landed directly on Naomi Carter. Within moments, the atmosphere of celebration transformed into one of tension and suspicion. Guests who had been laughing seconds earlier now crowded around the empty display case, whispering theories and exchanging worried looks. The diamond necklace had been one of the most valuable items scheduled for the charity auction, and its disappearance immediately became the only topic anyone wanted to discuss. Victoria Hale pushed through the gathering crowd and stared at the empty case in disbelief. "How long ago was it here?" she demanded. A staff member swallowed nervously. "Less than 10 minutes ago." Victoria's expression hardened. "Lock down this area immediately." Several managers began directing staff to remain nearby while security personnel arrived to assess the situation. Naomi Carter stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, observing the reactions around her. She noticed something interesting. Some people appeared concerned about the missing necklace. Others seemed far more interested in finding someone to blame. One guest glanced toward Naomi and narrowed his eyes. "Was she not working near this display earlier?" Another guest turned. "I think she was." The comments spread quickly. A third person nodded as though the conclusion had already been proven. "I saw her walking around here." Naomi remained calm. She understood how quickly assumptions could become accusations. Victoria heard the remarks and immediately focused her attention on Naomi. "You," she said sharply. "Come here." Conversations around the ballroom began to quiet as people watched. Naomi approached without hesitation. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria folded her arms. Were you near this display? Yes, Naomi answered truthfully. I passed by while completing my duties. Victoria looked around at the crowd. Interesting. Naomi said nothing. Did you touch the display case? Victoria continued.
No.
Did you see anyone else near it? Naomi thought for a moment. Several guests stopped to look at it. So did members of the staff. Victoria seemed unsatisfied by the answer. The growing audience sensed conflict and leaned closer. One investor whispered to another. A woman near the front shook her head disapprovingly. The assumptions were already forming. Naomi could almost see them spreading through the room.
Victoria stepped closer.
This is a very serious matter. I understand, Naomi replied calmly. Then perhaps you can explain why you happened to be near the necklace shortly before it disappeared. A few guests exchanged knowing looks. Naomi noticed how easily people accepted a narrative when it matched their expectations. She met Victoria's gaze and answered evenly. Because I was doing the job I was assigned to do. For a brief moment, Victoria appeared frustrated by Naomi's composure. She had expected nervousness or defensiveness. Instead, Naomi remained polite and steady. Security personnel arrived beside the display. One officer asked for details. Before anyone else could speak, several guests immediately pointed toward Naomi. The officer listened carefully but made no conclusions. Meanwhile, Naomi noticed something nobody else seemed to notice. Across the ballroom, near one of the side exits, a woman quickly ended a phone call and slipped a small object into her evening clutch. The movement lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it. Naomi did not. She filed the observation away silently. As accusations continued to circulate around her, she remained focused, patient, and attentive. The real story of the missing necklace had only just begun, and Naomi knew that before the night ended, the truth would reveal far more than the location of a piece of jewelry. The tension inside the ballroom continued to rise as security officers began speaking with staff members and reviewing preliminary information. What had started as a glamorous evening was quickly becoming an uncomfortable spectacle. Guests clustered together in small groups, sharing rumors that grew more dramatic with every retelling. Naomi Carter stood quietly beside her cleaning cart while conversations swirled around her. She noticed that very few people were interested in facts. Most seemed interested in finding someone who fit the story they had already chosen to believe. Victoria Hale stepped forward and addressed the nearest security supervisor. "We need to resolve this immediately," she said. "This gala cannot continue while a valuable auction item is missing." The supervisor nodded professionally. "We are gathering information from everyone who was near the display." Victoria glanced directly at Naomi. "Then perhaps we should start with the person who had the most access." Several guests murmured in agreement. Naomi remained calm. "I am happy to answer any questions," she said. Victoria appeared almost disappointed by the response. She had expected resistance. Instead, Naomi's composure made the accusations seem less convincing. Even so, the crowd had already begun forming opinions. One guest shook his head and whispered, "Something about this does not look right." Another replied, "The timing is too suspicious." Naomi listened without reacting. Years of experience had taught her that people often revealed more about themselves than about the person they were judging. The security supervisor asked a series of routine questions. Naomi answered each one clearly. Where had she been? Which areas had she cleaned? Who had she spoken to? Her answers were consistent and straightforward. Yet Victoria continued pressing the issue. "You were near the display. The necklace disappeared. Surely you understand why people are concerned." Naomi met her eyes. "I understand why people are making assumptions." The remark caused a brief silence. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Victoria quickly recovered. "Assumptions are not the issue. Responsibility is." Naomi nodded politely. "Then I hope everyone involved is being treated equally." The comment landed harder than anyone expected. A few people exchanged glances. Until that moment, nobody had questioned why the attention seemed focused on only one person. Before Victoria could respond, a hotel technician approached the security team. "The surveillance footage is being retrieved," he reported. "It may take a few more minutes." A wave of anticipation moved through the crowd. Many expected the video to settle the matter immediately. Naomi simply waited. While everyone focused on the coming footage, she noticed the same woman she had seen earlier. The woman stood near a column, clutching her evening bag a little too tightly. Her smile appeared forced. Her eyes repeatedly drifted toward the nearest exit. Naomi said nothing. She continued observing. Then another development changed the atmosphere entirely. The ballroom entrance suddenly opened. Several senior executives straightened immediately. Conversations stopped. Staff members exchanged surprised looks. Security personnel glanced toward the doorway. Someone important had arrived. Nobody had expected him to appear so early. Victoria turned toward the entrance, her expression shifting from frustration to eager anticipation. A whisper spread through the crowd like electricity. Ethan Brooks, the chief executive officer of Meridian Global Holdings, had just entered the ballroom. Ethan Brooks moved through the ballroom with the quiet confidence of a man who never needed to announce his importance. The moment guests recognized him, conversations stopped. Executives straightened their posture. Investors abandoned mid-sentence discussions. Even members of the hotel staff seemed to move more carefully. Ethan rarely attended public events without notice, and his unexpected appearance immediately shifted everyone's attention away from the missing necklace. Victoria Hale quickly approached him with a welcoming smile. "Mr. Brooks, we are honored to have you here tonight." Ethan nodded politely but did not stop walking. His eyes moved calmly across the ballroom, taking in the atmosphere. He noticed the nervous security personnel. He noticed the cluster of whispering guests. He noticed the empty display case. Most importantly, he noticed Naomi Carter standing beside her cleaning cart while dozens of people watched her with suspicion. Ethan slowed his pace. Victoria hurried to explain the situation. "We are dealing with a very unfortunate incident," she said. "A valuable necklace disappeared from the auction display." Ethan listened without interrupting. "Security is investigating," Victoria continued. "Several witnesses placed a staff member near the display shortly before the item vanished." She glanced toward Naomi. The implication was obvious. Ethan followed her gaze. For several seconds, he simply looked at Naomi. She returned his gaze calmly. No fear. No panique. No attempt to defend herself. Just quiet confidence. The silence stretched long enough to make people uncomfortable. Guests waited for Ethan to agree with the accusations. Instead, he asked a simple question. "Has anyone reviewed the surveillance footage?"
Victoria hesitated.
"It is still being processed." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then no conclusions have been reached." A few people exchanged uncertain glances. Victoria forced a smile. "Of course, but we must consider the circumstances." Ethan turned toward the security supervisor. "Have you found any evidence connecting this employee to the missing necklace?" "No, sir," the supervisor answered honestly. "We are still gathering information." Ethan looked back at the crowd. Many guests immediately avoided eye contact. Their confidence suddenly seemed less certain. "Interesting," Ethan said quietly. "So an entire room has already formed opinions before seeing a single piece of evidence." Nobody responded. The statement landed heavily across the ballroom. Victoria attempted to regain control. "We are simply being cautious." Ethan's expression remained calm. Caution and assumption are not the same thing. Then he did something nobody expected. He walked directly toward Naomi. The crowd parted instinctively to let him pass. Security officers stepped aside. Even Victoria fell silent. Naomi remained exactly where she was. Ethan stopped in front of her and offered a respectful nod. The reaction from the room was immediate. People looked confused. Some appeared shocked. Others seemed unable to understand why one of the most powerful executives in the country was treating a cleaner with such courtesy. Ethan then turned toward the security supervisor and spoke clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Release her from any further suspicion until actual evidence exists. The supervisor nodded. Yes, sir. A wave of surprise moved through the crowd. Guests who had been whispering accusations moments earlier suddenly found themselves without certainty. Victoria looked unsettled. This was not the direction she had expected. Yet what nobody realized was that Ethan Brooks had not even delivered the most surprising part of the evening. Not yet. An uneasy silence settled across the ballroom after Ethan Brooks instructed security to stop treating Naomi as the primary suspect. The guests who had confidently whispered accusations only minutes earlier now seemed uncertain. Some looked embarrassed. Others simply looked confused. Victoria Hale forced a polite smile, but the tension in her expression was becoming harder to hide. Mr. Brooks, she said carefully, we all appreciate fairness, but we still need answers. Ethan turned toward her. I agree. The room seemed to relax slightly. Then he added, which is exactly why I prefer facts over assumptions. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan had already shifted his attention back to Naomi. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The moment felt strangely significant, even though nobody understood why. Several executives exchanged curious glances. One board member quietly asked another, do they know each other? The other man shrugged. No one seemed to have an answer. Naomi stood calmly beside her cleaning cart, her posture unchanged despite being the center of attention. Ethan finally spoke. I apologize for the inconvenience this evening. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Apologize? To a cleaner? Victoria blinked in disbelief. The security supervisor looked equally puzzled. Ethan continued speaking in a calm, professional tone. You should not have been placed in this position without evidence. Naomi offered a small nod. Thank you. The exchange only deepened the confusion. Around the ballroom, guests began, studying Naomi more carefully. For the first time that evening, they seemed to be questioning their own assumptions. Ethan glanced toward the stage and then back at Naomi. There is also another matter we should address. Naomi's expression remained composed. I believe there is. Victoria stepped forward. What exactly is happening here? She asked. Ethan looked around the room. Hundreds of eyes were now fixed on him. The musicians had stopped playing. The servers had stopped moving. Even the security team appeared frozen in place. Every person in the ballroom sensed that something important was about to happen. Ethan adjusted his jacket and spoke clearly enough for the entire room to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, before this evening continues, I would like to properly acknowledge someone whose presence here is extremely important. The room fell completely silent. Victoria's confident expression began to fade. Naomi simply waited. Ethan turned fully toward her. Then, with complete sincerity and visible respect, he lowered his head slightly and said, Good evening, Madam President. We have been expecting you. For a moment, nobody reacted. The words seemed too impossible to process. Then shock spread through the ballroom like a wave. Several guests gasped. One woman nearly dropped her glass. Conversations erupted instantly as people tried to understand what they had just heard. Victoria stared at Naomi as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. A board member looked visibly pale. Even the security officers exchanged stunned looks. Ethan remained calm. Naomi remained calm. Everyone else looked as though their understanding of reality had just shattered. The woman they had treated as invisible. The woman they had accused. The woman they had dismissed as unimportant. Suddenly stood at the center of the room as someone far more powerful than any of them had imagined. And the biggest revelation was still waiting to be uncovered. The ballroom remained frozen in disbelief. Guests who had spent the evening ignoring Naomi Carter now stared at her as though they were seeing an entirely different person. The transformation had not happened because she changed her clothes or revealed some dramatic gesture. The transformation happened because they had finally learned a small piece of the truth. Victoria Hale struggled to regain her composure. Madam President? She repeated quietly. The title sounded unreal even as she spoke it. Ethan Brooks nodded. Yes. The crowd erupted into whispers once again. Several executives exchanged alarmed looks. Others immediately reached for their phones, searching for information they somehow should have known already. Naomi calmly placed a cleaning cloth on top of her cart and stepped forward. There was no anger in her expression. No satisfaction. Only a quiet confidence that suddenly made perfect sense. Ethan addressed the room. Many of you know that Meridian Global Holdings has undergone significant ownership changes over the past 2 years. What most of you do not know is that the majority investment group responsible for saving this company during its most difficult financial period has been represented by a single individual. He turned toward Naomi. That individual is Madam President Naomi Carter. The silence that followed felt even heavier than before. A board member who had previously ignored Naomi lowered his eyes. One investor looked genuinely embarrassed. Victoria seemed unable to speak. Ethan continued. When Meridian faced potential collapse 3 years ago, many investors walked away. Madam President Carter believed in the company when others did not. Her leadership group provided the capital that preserved thousands of jobs. Several employees standing near the back looked stunned. They had spent years hearing stories about anonymous investors without knowing who stood behind them. Naomi finally spoke. Her voice was calm and measured. Titles are not what matter. Character matters. Nobody interrupted. Every person in the room seemed determined not to miss another word. Naomi looked around the ballroom. I attended tonight under a different role for a reason. I wanted to observe how people treat others when they believe there is nothing to gain from showing kindness. The statement struck many guests like a mirror held directly in front of them. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down. Victoria's face lost more color. Naomi continued. I watched employees help one another. I watched strangers offer encouragement. I also watched people dismiss workers without learning their names. Her eyes briefly moved across the crowd before returning to Victoria. What I observed was very informative. Before anyone could respond, the hotel technician hurried toward the security supervisor carrying a tablet computer. The surveillance footage is ready, he announced. The room immediately became alert again. The missing necklace had almost been forgotten amid the shocking revelations. The supervisor accepted the tablet and began reviewing the video. Naomi remained silent. She already suspected what the footage would reveal. Across the ballroom, the woman with the evening clutch suddenly appeared nervous again. Her smile disappeared. Her hand tightened around her purse strap. Naomi noticed the reaction immediately. So did Ethan Brooks. And as the security supervisor's eyes widened while reviewing the footage, it became clear that the biggest surprise of the night was about to expose far more than a missing necklace. The security supervisor stared at the tablet for several long seconds before looking up. His expression alone was enough to tell everyone that the story they had believed all evening was about to fall apart. The crowd pressed closer, eager to hear what the footage revealed. Victoria Hale stepped forward immediately. Well? She asked. What does it show? The supervisor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. It shows that Naomi Carter never touched the necklace display. A wave of whispers spread across the ballroom. Several guests exchanged embarrassed looks. Others simply stared at Naomi. The accusations that had seemed so certain only minutes earlier were already beginning to crumble. Victoria's face tightened. Then who took it? The supervisor looked back at the screen. The footage shows multiple people approaching the display throughout the evening. He paused. However, one individual interacted with the case immediately before the necklace disappeared. The room became silent again. Every eye followed the supervisor as he turned the tablet outward. Several executives stepped closer to view the recording. Naomi remained calm. Ethan Brooks folded his arms and watched quietly. The video showed the display area from above. Guests came and went. Staff members passed by. Then the footage revealed a woman approaching the case while appearing to speak on her phone. She glanced around, opened her evening clutch, and reached toward the display. The image was clear enough to remove all doubt. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Heads turned instantly toward the woman standing near the side exit. The same woman Naomi had observed earlier. Her face went pale. She looked around as though searching for an escape that no longer existed. The security supervisor continued speaking. The footage also shows the necklace being placed into her bag. Several guests stepped away from the woman immediately. Moments earlier, she had blended effortlessly into the crowd. Now she stood alone. A security officer approached professionally and requested to inspect her clutch. The woman hesitated briefly before handing it over. Within seconds, the missing necklace was recovered. A stunned silence followed. The room seemed unable to process how quickly everything had changed. Naomi had gone from suspect to vindicated. The true source of the theft had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Yet Naomi noticed something else. The crowd appeared more shocked by their own behavior than by the recovery of the necklace. They had not simply been wrong. They had been eager to be wrong.
Victoria stood motionless.
The realization was beginning to settle in. She had publicly questioned the integrity of an innocent person without evidence. Worse, she had done so because the accusation felt convenient. Ethan finally spoke. Interesting. His calm voice carried across the ballroom. The evidence was available all along. Yet many people preferred assumptions. Nobody answered. There was nothing to say. Naomi looked around the room and saw lowered eyes everywhere. Executives who once ignored her now seemed unable to meet her gaze. Investors who had whispered suspicions now looked deeply uncomfortable. The recovered necklace was no longer the most important issue. The real issue was what the evening had revealed about the people in the room. And as the weight of that realization settled over the gala, everyone sensed that Naomi Carter was about to deliver the final lesson they would never forget. The ballroom remained silent long after the necklace had been recovered. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead, the musicians still waited near the stage, and the elegant decorations remained exactly as they had been at the beginning of the evening. Yet everything felt different. The room had been transformed not by the missing necklace, but by the truth. Naomi Carter slowly stepped forward and looked around the crowd. No one interrupted her. No one whispered. For the first time all night, every person in the room was listening. Ethan Brooks stood nearby, allowing the moment to belong entirely to her. Naomi's eyes moved across the faces of executives, investors, managers, servers, hotel employees, and guests. Some appeared embarrassed. Some looked thoughtful. Others simply looked ashamed. Tonight was never about a necklace, Naomi said calmly. Her voice carried through the ballroom without effort. The necklace was valuable, but it was not the most valuable thing in this room. Nobody spoke. Character is more valuable. Integrity is more valuable. Respect is more valuable. Several guests lowered their eyes. Naomi continued. When I arrived this evening, I wore a housekeeping uniform. Nothing more. Nothing less. Within minutes, many people decided who I was. They decided what I was worth. They decided how much respect I deserved. The words landed heavily throughout the room. Victoria Hale stood motionless near the stage. Naomi looked toward her briefly before continuing. What surprised me was not that mistakes were made. Every person makes mistakes. What surprised me was how quickly people were willing to believe the worst about someone they did not know. The room remained silent. Naomi smiled gently. There was no anger in her expression. Only honesty. The truth is simple. A person's position does not determine their value. A uniform does not determine their character. A job title does not determine their dignity. Several hotel employees exchanged emotional glances. For many of them, it was the first time someone with tremendous authority had publicly said what they had always hoped others understood. Naomi then turned toward the staff members standing along the edges of the ballroom. To every employee here tonight, thank you. You are the reason this event exists. You are the reason businesses succeed. You deserve respect whether anyone is watching or not. A wave of applause began among the staff. Slowly it spread throughout the room until nearly everyone was clapping. Ethan Brooks joined them. Many executives followed. Some guests even stood. Victoria eventually stepped forward. Her voice was quiet. Madam President, I owe you an apology. Naomi nodded respectfully. The important thing is not the apology. The important thing is what happens after tonight. Victoria lowered her head and accepted the lesson. The applause grew louder. For the first time all evening, people were not applauding wealth, power, or status. They were applauding truth. As the music finally resumed and conversations slowly returned, the atmosphere felt completely different from before. People greeted employees by name. Servers received sincere thanks. Managers spoke more carefully. The lesson had already begun changing the room. Naomi glanced out the window at the Chicago skyline one last time before preparing to leave. She had arrived unnoticed. She had been judged, doubted, and underestimated. Yet she walked away having revealed something far more important than her title. She had revealed the true character of everyone around her, and in doing so, she reminded them that the greatest measure of a person is not how they treat the powerful, but how they treat those they believe have none.
Most people don't reveal the true character when they meet someone powerful. They reveal the true character when they believe someone has no power. Throughout the evening, Naomi wore the same uniform, the same shoe, and carried a quiet smile. Yet, the way people treat her changed when they discovered who she is. Why? Because many people respect the status more than they respect the people. But every person you meet carries a story that you cannot see. Every cleaner, server, coworker, security guard, or even a stranger, they are fighting something that you know nothing about. Some may become a future leaders, some may become a future friend, or even if they don't, they still deserve respect. Naomi didn't become valuable when the others learned she is a powerful executive. She was valuable at the moment she walked into the room. The only thing that changed is what the others finally chose to see. Never let a job decide how much kindness you offer. Never let a uniform determine how much you respect. Never let a uniform determine how much respect you show. Because a character isn't measured by wealth, status, or power. Dignity belongs to anyone. The greatest test of a character isn't how they treat the powerful. It is how they treat the people in the society or people who are often overlooked. Respect should never earn by status. It should be given because someone is human. If you like this video, please share, like, and subscribe for my channel. Thanks for watching.